This is an amazing venue and conference and community, and I'm super excited to be here on the stage getting to join you today. So I've been traveling a lot recently, mostly for work, a little bit with family, but all of this traveling I've been doing as I've been working on this talk has gotten me thinking about how bringing a new feature or a new product to market is kind of like taking a road trip or planning a trip with a group. So just like you and your friends might plan a trip together, the product and marketing teams, I come from a marketing background, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. The product and marketing teams and customer success and sales and so on are all trying to reach the same end goal with the launch of a new feature or a new product. But everyone's got a different view of the best way to get there, right? What route should we take? What constitutes a great trip, right? So maybe you like hiking and active events, and maybe your friends really like lounging and eating and drinking. And everyone's approaching the trip from a series of very different past experiences, right? So how did you do things at your last company or within your last team if you've recently moved teams? So in a perfect world, on this trip, you would all end up at this beautiful destination and everyone would end up having a great time together. Or in product development language, you'd release a feature that your customers would absolutely love, right? And use fanatically. But if those differences in opinions and travel styles and expectations don't get addressed up front and accounted for across departments, at the very least, you're going to have a crappy time on your trip. And at worst, you might actually not reach your destination at all. So this talk is about product and marketing planning that road trip together, so to speak, with the destination of a successful new feature launch, one that creates volumes of highly engaged customers in mind. And I'm going to be going through some of the pitfalls that my business partner and I see a lot when working with teams on new feature launches. And we'll provide some concrete solutions for each. So this is my business partner, Georgiana Lottie, and I. We work with SaaS, or software as a service companies, particularly, to kind of figure out across their customer journey what levers can they pull to unlock more growth and hit their next revenue milestone. And because we both come from marketing backgrounds, but we work a lot across the customer journey, not necessarily just at the marketing stage, so to speak, so advertising or content marketing and so on, we end up across our client base working a lot at the intersection of product efforts and marketing efforts. And many times that is around the launch of a new feature or the launch of a new product within a product line. So the pitfalls that I'm going to be sharing today are pulled from a lot of the experiences that we've had working cross-functionally with our team, with different teams. And before I jump in, I do want to establish just some basic rules of the road. So as I give this talk, I'm assuming two things. First, I'm kind of assuming that there's some very foundational cross-departmental communication in place within your org already. So the product team probably isn't launching new features to market without letting marketing know at all. Or if that's the case, you're actively trying to correct that or involve them more. And the other thing I'm assuming is that you're measuring customer activation and adoption and long-term engagement with your product already. Or if you're not, then you want to be tracking those metrics better. So that's kind of the baseline that we're going to operate at through this talk. So the three pitfalls we're going to cover at their very simplest definitions are timing and broadcasting of information between teams, connection to customer motivations or not having a strong enough connection, and then messiness around ownership, right? Which person is in charge of what activity on the road to release? So let's jump into those with the first one, because this is the most common one that we see, which is timing or not great timing and broadcasting of important information about the release. So if I had to tie this back to our going on a trip with friends analogy, let's say that you assume that as you're planning out your trip, this is going to be a kind of like active adventure style trip, right? So you're packing your hiking boots, maybe you're considering buying a surfboard for the first time because you want to try out surf lessons, you plan to get up in the morning and go on a run. And your friend is assuming this is like a chill out, like sleep on the beach vacation. And so all they're really packing is a pair of flip-flops and a book and maybe a sun hat. And if I had to take this back to a business context, this comes to the idea that everyone has their own idea of what a release is going to best look like for customers, and that can change over time, even if it starts out relatively the same, right? So if you are planning a beach vacation with a friend, that, as stated, can mean two different things to two different people. And when a release is in the works, at the beginning, all teams involved have a cursory knowledge of what that is. But as product then works on that feature, scope changes, right? So maybe it's reduced and marketing isn't really aware that there's reduction. Or maybe things are added and marketing doesn't even know that there's additional components being added to the feature. Either way, over time, what's being released changes from what was originally discussed. And if that's happening in silos, and if marketing isn't brought into that conversation at the right time, then they aren't able to execute the activities needed to successfully generate demand and interest in what's about to be released. And so, depending on what's being launched, marketing might need, or typically does need, more time than is assumed to be necessary in order to get the positioning and the messaging right. In order to develop all of the content needed to communicate with the different segments who are going to care most about this release. And in order to make sure that all of the tracking machinery is in place for them to understand, did we succeed, did we not succeed? And so if they don't have the time to put all of those pieces in place while a feature is underway, then the launch itself is going to be pretty lukewarm. And I share this quote from the director of product management at Intercom to make the case that this is a mistake that even world-class brands make, world-class companies, world-class product teams. So in a particular article that Brian Donahue, the director of product management at Intercom, wrote, he said that sometimes we'd set a feature live with no regard to marketing. And I want to drive home the point here that as a product team or as a product manager, of course you want to achieve your goals of engagement or adoption or at least interest in what's being released. That's why we go into this. But if marketing isn't given the time to do their jobs right, then that means your goals will suffer as well. And so the solution is to go ahead and involve marketing a lot earlier than you may be doing now or you may have thought was necessary. And I don't mean that you're bringing marketing in because you want them to advise you on what V1 will look like or anything of that nature. I more mean bringing them in time to develop their plan in tandem with the timing of you developing yours. So if we had to map that out visually, this is a launch process my business partner Gia adapted in our work together with clients. And the original version came from a product management and training company called 280 Group. So you'll notice that down here at the bottom, that green line, I'm not sure how easy or difficult that is to read on screen, but that green line represents what's happening in marketing, and the purple line represents what's happening in product. And you'll notice that while the product team is making the business case for what's to be built, doing the marketing research, doing the market research, discussing V1 scope, marketing should already be up and running and working on what their strategy is going to be. So imagine this in comparison to not really even bringing marketing in until the testing phase, for example. Right? That would be drastically less time for them to be able to make the impact needed with your audience or with your existing customers. A related solution is to implement go and no-go dates within your release phases. Quick show of hands, does anyone here already use go, no-go dates? Okay, so I'm seeing a couple of people, which is great. So congrats if this is already happening within your organization. The basic gist of a go, no-go date is that it's an established decision point within the release cycle. So the team responsible for the launch essentially needs to decide at that point, is the release in an acceptable condition to be launched to the public or not? And you can see it happens a little bit before launch. Ideally, 2 to 3 weeks is a good amount of time, because at that point, if it's not ready, then product can identify the items still needed to result in a go. Meanwhile, marketing has space to regroup, turn off any scheduled campaigns, and shift focus and stay productive while those additional items are worked on in order to get the release to a go state. This prevents false starts, right? So what I mean by that is it prevents any marketing campaigns from going live before the feature is ready. And it also prevents the need for marketing to constantly check in, right? What's the status? How's it going? What's the status? Which no one likes on either side of the table there. So the second pitfall that we run into a lot with teams is a lack of deep connection to customers' motivations. And this might sound a little bit weird because any great product team is doing research, right? Doing user research, gathering feedback. So I'm not suggesting that the connection to customers isn't being done whatsoever, but sometimes there can be a gap between how customers make buying or adoption decisions and what's being built. So I'm going to try to bring this back to the travel analogy. This one was a little bit tricky, but I kind of shoehorned it in. This would be like if you're making plans for your trip, right, and you're hitting up Google and you're looking at, okay, this coffee shop looks really cool, this restaurant looks really cool, and let's say you find like a nice, like relaxed wine bar that you want to hit up one night just to enjoy some conversation, and we're going for essentially a very chill vibe at this wine bar. But your friend, who you're planning the trip with, may have been to this destination already. And so they say, hey, I hate to break it to you, but during the day, yes, this is a very relaxed environment. But in the evening, they actually pull away all the tables and chairs, and they bring in a DJ, and the place turns into this huge rave, which might be a cool experience, but what you're envisioning doesn't really match with the reality of what's going on in this space. So that was kind of a clunky example, but it was a shot. So if I have to take this back into software terms, after drafting the problem statement for a new feature, it can be really easy to get caught up in your vision of what's being innovated on, right? Because that's exciting. We go into this space because we have a passion for building great things and pushing the envelope. But when this ekes into how the feature is named or how it's positioned in the market or what messages are used to describe it to customers, that can start to cause some problems because what's discussed internally is often not in alignment with how customers talk about what they look for or what they're needing. So there's a talk that's going to be going on later this afternoon by April Dunford on product positioning. And if this is in any way important to you, which it should be to everyone, I would highly recommend attending it. But the gist I'll say here is that as humans, we do not buy what we don't understand. And so when the way that the feature being released is described in terms of future thinking, right, innovation and how different it is, it can actually end up falling short because customers might not understand. They might not have bridged that gap that you bridged within the product team. So I sometimes refer to this as the red ocean problem because I was working with a team at one point, a combination product and marketing team, and they were making a shift from a red ocean strategy to a blue ocean strategy. Does anyone know the red and blue ocean strategy concept? Okay, cool. So I would say like probably 20-25% of the room. So in general, red ocean is commodity market, right? There's existing demand, you have direct competitors, and so it's a bit of a feature race or an innovation race. And in a blue ocean, you are entering a brand new market where there is no demand, and so the challenge is not to compete with competitors, but to create demand. So this team was working on a feature that they believed was going to push them from red ocean into blue ocean. And internally, there was no real effort to translate, okay, how would our customers talk about this thing? Because as a customer, you have no idea what red ocean or blue ocean means, and so naming a feature the red ocean feature, even internally, started to cause a lot of breakdowns between product and marketing as marketing tried to plan out how to generate interest in this thing. How do we write copy about it? What kind of creative do we use for this? So while the product team focuses on the future naturally and builds bridges to that future, the marketing team's job is to get customers who are way over there to that bridge. And sometimes that means using language that you might, or phrases that you might be trying to kill if you're trying to enter a new market or position yourself as interesting and innovative in the space. Oh, sorry, I just turned a laser pointer on. So rather than making this like a pull between product and marketing, the best way I've seen to solve this issue is to take what your customers say on interviews and in calls with alpha and beta users and within support tickets with those early users, and just mirror that language back to them as you figure out how do we describe what it is we're releasing. Because the words that customers already use are the words they naturally understand, right? So much more clearly than something we might come up with internally to describe whatever cool thing it is that we're working on. So my favorite way to do this is, as I just mentioned, by getting on calls directly with customers. And essentially, this kind of goes back to the first pitfall, which is marketing sometimes isn't involved in these calls. And if they are, they have so much more to run with as they craft a plan for how to launch what it is that's being worked on into the market, to your customers and to your larger audience. So very tactically, if you are running any kind of jobs to be done interviews with your customers as you plan future features, if you are having calls with early users during the development process, pull marketing into those. Add them to the calendar events and just have them come and sit and listen so they can start to kind of understand how it is current customers are talking about this thing that you're working on. I recently worked with a company called Autobooks, which is a financial platform, essentially. It's all kinds of financial tools for small businesses. And right before I came on board, the team at Autobooks had run a big round of jobs to be done interviews in order to figure out, okay, what do we build next in order to improve adoption? And so as I came on board, essentially what we did was take those jobs to be done recordings and transcripts and highlight sticky lines of copy or interesting phrases customers used, and then we leveraged that in everything we did to position and develop messages around and build communication campaigns around the new feature. And I'm really, really confident in using this method. My business partner and I use it all the time with teams. And at Autobooks, within 30 days of launching the new feature, we saw the total number of customers who had engaged with this particular feature, or not engage with the feature, but achieve a particular success metric that the feature was designed to get them to, increased by 300%. So by mirroring customers' language back to them, we avoided the trap of speaking in innovation terms and losing customers because they didn't understand what we were talking about. I'm going to skip this one just for a bit of time's sake, because I want to get to the third pitfall, which is messiness around who owns what activities leading up to launch. So has anyone ever gone on a trip and realized that you and another person traveling with you packed the same thing, and then you both forgot something really important? This just happened to me. I was on a camping trip where it wasn't multiple people packing tents, but there were a couple of us on a camping trip, and everyone brought hamburger buns, and nobody brought anything for breakfast. It was a really rough trip. The problem here is that this exists within teams as well, with regard to all kinds of documentation and activities leading up to the launch of a new feature. And lack of documented ownership is what creates this, because when there's no list, there's no actual written down or documented source of who's in charge of what, then we all have to operate on assumptions. And that creates lack of clarity, and it creates this weird resentment or tension. So Gia, my partner, worked with a product manager recently at a pretty well-known software company who had just brought on a product marketing manager, but who was personally still doing all of the work that the product marketing manager was supposed to be doing, because he wasn't used to handing off that work yet. And it was creating this, first, a huge amount of overload on his plate as he tried to push the team forward toward this release. But it also created this weird situation where his product marketing manager was twiddling his thumbs and tension was building because he wasn't sure how he was supposed to support the product team in advance of this release. And that's really common, and a solution for this is choosing a clear framework to end that kind of activity free-for-all and actually give people ownership and boundaries over what they're doing. So RACI is a framework that we like to use for this. RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So responsible, essentially, if you were to have a huge list of tasks and a person assigned to each one, or not even a person, I'll show an image in a moment to kind of explain this. Responsible is the people on a project who are doing the work, they're executing, they're getting the day-to-day things done. The accountable person on a task or a project is the person overseeing that group. They're the one whose head will roll, so to speak, if it doesn't get done. So they're responsible for removing blockers. Consulted is team members who might not have direct involvement, but who have some expertise. And so you might want their opinion as you move forward on the work. And then people who are informed on a project are those who, they don't really need to give any day-to-day involvement, but they just want to be looped in and understand what's happening so that they can also be productive. So here's an example, very, very simple example. Shoot, sorry, I keep hitting the laser pointer. A really simple example of this is done in regards to developing a sitemap, designing wireframes, creating a style guide, and coding templates. So this is a very basic website example. But you can see here that all the different people involved are given a title of responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. And what this does is a couple of things. So first, there's no more a bunch of different people working on the same task, not realizing that other team members are also doing that task. And also, this gives the entire team, everyone who's involved in a release, no matter what department they're in, a better idea of even to uneven workload distribution, so you can adjust accordingly. So maybe if product has been in charge of certain activities, and they're realizing like, wow, there's no way we can get to the finish line if we have to own all this. Maybe marketing has some space. This kind of helps you make the case for that and start that conversation. This is probably the fluffiest sounding solution, but it's my favorite because it's very easy to act on, which is to establish touch points for sharing knowledge or building intentional cross-functional communication into your schedule, both personally and team-wide if you have that ability to do so. So a lot of messiness around ownership just comes when communication channels don't exist because everyone's busy, or they get blocked, also oftentimes because everyone is busy. So there are really practical ways to fix that that don't have to be super formal. One of my favorites is running a lunch and learn every once in a while. So a lunch and learn is just you and the people that you work with day to day, the ones you're really ingrained with. You buy people who also would care about your project, breakfast or lunch, and you just give a little update. Similar to a stand-up, but less formal, more big picture. And you give space for other people whose work is affected by yours, the understanding of what you're doing, and also the space for them to ask questions and get clarity, which is really hard to do in the day-to-day when we're also task-focused. So other teams, like marketing, get valuable insight into what you're doing with this when this happens, and it breaks down those silos I mentioned earlier in a really, really, again, informal, friendly way. I also like to do standing coffee meetings. These are more of a one-on-one situation. So if I were the marketing owner, if I were the marketing owner, for example, on a particular release, I might establish a standing coffee meeting with the PM in charge of that release, maybe every other week, depending on the intensity of the launch, just to say, hey, here's what we're doing. Also, here's where we're stuck. Can I pick your brain on that? Can you help me out? How can I help you out? Again, this doesn't have to be a super formal thing. It's instead an exercise in building rapport and creating more of an organic understanding of what each other is going through, which is going to go a long way later when you need to pull a favor or you need to have a hard conversation and you've built up this trust in a very friendly, low-pressure way. Finally, this one is a bit more formal. So it would require more internal conversation and decision-making on this. But cross-functional stand-ups can be incredibly valuable for larger team-wide understanding. So as I referenced this actually a bit earlier, but after your standard departmental stand-up, you might have a team stand-up where everyone involved in a release shows up, and the focus is less on the minute day-to-day. The focus is more only on projects or tasks that affect those other teams. This is a bit more of a time constraint activity though, so you might not want to do this more than once a week, maybe every other week or once a month, depending on the size of your organization. But this, again, gives visibility to what is occurring on other teams. And if there are any requests from one team to another, this allows the team making the request to know, hey, is this being worked on? Is this even in your guys' plans or not? And how do we adjust accordingly? So to recap, as you plan for your next major release, watch out for these 3 big pitfalls in front of you. Again, poor timing and broadcasting of information, lack of deep connection to how your customers talk about their problems and how they talk about their searched for solutions when introducing a release to the market, and then messiness around who owns what during the planning and the launch. Because without proper planning, these pitfalls can result in features that launch to lukewarm engagement or that go almost unused entirely, which none of us want. And thankfully, all of these can be avoided as long as you're intentional about doing so. So the ways to solve that are involving marketing earlier than you thought was necessary, centralizing all naming and positioning and messaging decisions around your customer's language, not internal language. And by using a framework, RACI is one, as I mentioned, as well as intentional in-person check-ins in order to develop more of those cross-functional connections on an ongoing basis. I mean, at the end of the day, both sides are fighting to build a product that has true value and that actually gets used frequently by current and future customers. So as a company, we can make our little mark on the universe, right? Making that mark requires kind of killing the idea that product and marketing are separate and independent of each other anyway, because it's only when the two of them work in tandem over time and throughout the entire development process that we can both build something useful for people. So as I end this, I'm happy to chat about this further. You can reach me at that email address. That is my personal email, or my Twitter handle. Again, I'm super grateful to have gotten to be here, so thanks everyone so much.